Well, hello there. It's a good day to be talking about the media and polarized society. The day after the elections in the U.S., in which we look to be more polarized than ever before, it should give us all some pause and food for thought. But we have two excellent people to talk about the role of the media in polarized societies. Paula Peters from Change.org and Dima Khatib from AJ+. So I want to get your thoughts. I mean, neither of you are traditional journalists. Dima, you were, but Paula, your group is dedicated to affecting change, bringing about change by highlighting experiences that illustrate the need for it. And I want to start out by asking you to give us an example of how you can do that. And in particular, there was one that you were telling me about before that we all remember. And I'd like you to just tell the story of how you did that.
Yeah, okay. So hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here. So Change is the largest campaigning platform in the world with over 250 million users. And the story we've been talking about, and it's a very Change.org story. So a couple of years ago, I saw a petition started by a young Nigerian girl. She was 19, about a couple of, over 120 girls in Nigeria being abducted by Boko Haram. There was no news around this story. I checked all the news outlets. I couldn't find anything. So I called her up and I said, what's your petition about? And she said, yeah, this abduction actually happened and no one knows about it. And I want to bring this to world attention. So what we then did at Change.org is we supported that young woman to create a global movement to raise awareness. You might know this movement. It went under the name Bring Back Our Girls. And at the end, the officers of Gordon Brown were calling her. Michelle Obama was part of it. It became as big as it gets. Sadly, not all of the girls could have been saved. But it is something that we at Change.org pride ourselves. We give a voice, or we make the voices of everyday heroes being heard, who normally would go unheard. And we do this over and over again with millions and millions of users around the world.
Now, Dima, you are with Al Jazeera AJ+, not Al Jazeera per se, the Al Jazeera we see on TV. How is Al Jazeera Plus different than your brethren at Al Jazeera?
Hi, everyone. AJ Plus has a completely different philosophy, completely different audience. So we figured that there's a whole generation that doesn't go home, sit on the couch, and wait for the news like we are used to it. There's a whole generation that was brought up on using their phones, social media. So we thought we'd go where they are. So we made social videos. They're snacky, they're cool. They tell you the story just as much as you need to know, not the full scope that the large breaking news networks would do. And we target millennials between 18 and 24. That's the first target, and then 24 to 35 years old. And we try and tell their stories rather than speak from above, from the power. So we tell their stories from within. We tell them the stories that actually matter to them, that make a difference in their life. And our philosophy is based on the user and the audience, that is the same as us. We don't have the authority that you and I would have on TV telling people, oh, this is what happened and this is how it goes. No, we build the product together with our audience. They know as much as we do, except we know how to tell the story professionally.
So give us an example of a story that you've told that was successful, that penetrated, that went viral.
Well, we have a lot of successful stories. I'll tell you one that made impact, which are my favorite stories that make impact in one person's life, just like your story of the Boko Haram. So this Bolivian teenager, he makes robots out of trash. And we did the story. first in English, and we did it in Spanish, and we did it in Arabic, and it went viral in all languages. And this boy got so much attention that MIT contacted him to go and study in the US. He got contacted by universities in the UK, and in the end, he got sponsored to teach the first robotics course in the University of La Paz, where he is still teaching now. So we made change in his life, which impacted the life of probably many more in a country like Bolivia, where robotics are probably not a very important thing, because of other more priority things.
Do you view yourself as having a mission?
Yes, definitely. Every journalist, in my opinion, has a mission. I don't think journalism means much if it didn't have a mission. So our mission at AJ Plus is to help people understand their realities. So if they decide to change them, or they make decisions like in the US, or to elect, or in Mexico, where we verified information during the elections recently to help the new voters, about 14 million new voters in Mexico, make their mind up about such an important election. We help them make the decisions that are best for them by giving them the information, by empowering them with information.
Paula, I want to talk. I moderated a panel yesterday about disinformation and fake news, and how it has, all the dangers that we face. You are, in effect, a social media platform, correct? And we've seen how social media has been manipulated by malicious actors from foreign governments and all. Is that a danger for a group like yours? Like, how do you know that somebody using your platform to launch a petition is not really who they say they are and is acting on behalf of a malicious foreign actor or government?
Yeah, so obviously fake news, like for any big internet platform, it's the topic of today's world, and it's an issue. I would say, though, at Change.org gladly, because we're a campaigning platform, it's not been affecting us nearly as much as, let's say, Twitter or Facebook. And the simple reason is that you cannot fake news engagement and real human stories. It's hard to get people behind you. You might get to convince 50 or 100 to sign your campaign and get behind your cause, but if your cause is completely built on a fake news, the word will spread quickly and people will come and criticize your campaign. So by people getting behind a social cause, and people starting to becoming engaged, that's very, very difficult to construct that off of fake news.
I'm not so sure it's as clear cut as you're presenting.
No, but it's not alike. Like signing a petition or being part of a mobilizing entity is not like a like on Facebook. So I might read a headline, fake news. I might not realize it's fake news and I click like or share. But with a petition, before you sign something, you actually have to put your first name, your last name, your email address, your zip code. You better know what you're signing. It's a political statement, a state of engagement. And we've just not seen a splurge of fake news on the platform. If we do, like we have flagging mechanisms like all other platforms, then we validate, and we have country teams in over 18 markets, and they just validate the news.
Right. No, I'm just thinking of the experience we had in the United States during the 2016 election, in which we all know now how Russian actors manipulated Facebook and Twitter, using, in some cases, real events. For instance, we know that the Russians used the Black Lives Matter movement to stoke resentment in certain communities and exploit that for their own purposes. Of course, at the same time, they were also running Facebook messages totally counter to the Black Lives Matter. But it was real. They were playing on real events. So one can imagine the same sort of playbook being used to manipulate Change.org.
I believe it's really hard to hack engagement. While it's technically possible, and it does happen in some instances that signatures might be faked, or we might have a signature attack from robots, it's actually quite easy to detect those and then remove those in hindsight. But while you may be able to hack signatures, what you cannot hack is engagement. It's really hard. Like if you have an actual human running a campaign, like a mother from the UK whose 2-year-old son died, and she learned that in the UK you only have 3 days of bereavement leave. So she started a petition. She got 200,000 people behind her, forcing the UK government to extend the bereavement leave to 2 weeks. It's hard to fake news that, and it's hard to hack engagement. Like either you have a group of people who are calling decision makers, who are calling journalists, who are going out on the streets and rallying, or you don't. And that's hard to hack with robots.
Yeah.
Like, gladly it is for us.
Now, Dima, you've had experiences of your own with trolls and malicious actors. In fact, you were telling me just before we came on about you had an experience with Saudi trolls. Tell us what happened and how they try to manipulate you and your platform.
Well, the thing is, I think every journalist in the Arab world is suffering from this. The trolls from all sides just come and they're at you. Even if you tweet about your hair, they will find something that they will attack you on that is related to whatever they want to promote. So I think it all started during the Arab revolutions, and the tactics that she mentioned would be used by regimes. For example, they would go and post something in the name of an activist just to debunk it later and show that this activist is a liar, that nobody killed anybody in Syria, nobody is killing protesters anywhere. So it all started there, and it developed into a systemic thing that governments use at every instance. So right now, whatever I tweet, I will get Saudi trolls who will even get to the point of telling me things like, what music would you like us to play when we chop you up, like we chopped up Jamal Khashoggi? Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of thing I get. Whatever I tweet, even if I tweeted about cooking, just because they know that my position is such on the matter that I defend someone like Jamal Khashoggi, and I request for the governments to work on getting us the truth about how he was killed. But this has become so natural in our daily life that, you know, if it doesn't happen, we feel lonely online. Like, where are the trolls?
Well, and
seriously, it's been 7 years of this since the revolution.
I suspect you don't feel terribly lonely online.
I don't.
Well, she doesn't because she's a professional and used to it. But to build on this, what we see is that petition starters on change.org, they have to deal with this, and they're not experienced to that exposure of like violence and hate speech. And what we see is that actually ordinary people are afraid to speak up and are afraid to make their voice heard because they are not used to this kind of trolling. So what we do with our teams on the ground is we try to provide as much as support to petition starters by telling them that this will happen and telling them how to deal with it. And we do, like, what I'm afraid of, especially in today's world, is that the people we actually need to create the change to face some of the biggest problems the world has ever seen will not speak up because they're silenced, they're afraid by all these troll armies. That's my biggest worry.
I want to just go back to your situation, Dima, in the Mideast. You work for an organization, Al Jazeera, that is funded by the Qatari government. The Saudis have tried to shut down Al Jazeera.
Yes.
So how can you report on what's going on in Saudi Arabia? It seems to me that, for instance, women driving would be a perfect kind of issue, kind of video that you would want to do. But doing something like that, people are going to say inevitably you're tainted because you're working for a organization funded by a government that is at odds with the Saudis.
Well, it's not
How do you
the government.
break through
We were made targets. Personally made targets when the Saudis and the Emiratis, the Bahrainis and the Egyptians decided, we want to shut down Al Jazeera. And it turned out they were planning to come and bomb Al Jazeera altogether. That was their plan, like come bomb from the air and go with their tanks, topple the emir, change the regime, and then take over basically the whole place. Luckily, that did not happen. The thing is, how do you make sure your journalists don't get emotional about this. They cannot travel to see their families in the Emirates or Saudi Arabia. They cannot go back to Egypt anymore if they are Egyptian. They are afraid to even make a phone call to the Emirates, for example, because their families may be punished for talking to them. So how do you make sure that the journalist in your newsroom or the artist is still doing a journalist's job and not being like
Polarized.
fueled by the anger and the frustration they have in their life? That for me has been the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
So I work on the journalists in the newsroom, on our artists, and make sure that they keep their eyes on track. If there is a good story coming out of the Emirates or Saudi Arabia or Egypt or Bahrain, we will still do it. And we will do it with the AJ Plus philosophy from within the people. We'll celebrate the Saudi women driving a car for the first time. But we will not forget to mention the women that campaigned for this for years and are now in jail, and who used to give us interviews before they were taken to jail, before they were given the right to drive. So what we try and do, and that's really tough, is keep telling the stories that matter to those people, because we do believe the people in Saudi Arabia, in the Emirates, in all of those countries would not want this. Would not want this kind of polarization that there is between people and people. And this is where it became very ugly. It became people against people, not government against government. On social media, you can see that, how low it has become. So we try and work on people accepting each other in this very tense atmosphere. We try and remind people that we have things in common. So we will celebrate anything cultural from those countries. We will celebrate any achievement of individuals, although they might be too scared to talk to us or give us an interview.
Will you celebrate common ground in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
No, not the same way.
Okay.
Not the same way. Very good
Why
point.
not?
The thing is, we have an editorial line, right?
Yeah.
So on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we have a very clear editorial line. And this is why I told you before we spoke, we're not neutral.
Yeah.
I don't think journalists can be neutral, or anybody ever can be neutral.
Right.
I don't believe in neutrality. I think it's an illusion. I believe in professional journalism. So I think the most important thing for a journalist is when you are telling people your opinion, say that it's an opinion. Don't fool people into thinking it's fact, because it's not. You have the right to have an opinion as a journalist. And when you are a media organization and you have an editorial line, be proud of your editorial line. Don't shy away from saying what your editorial line is. My editorial line says that if I am in Tahrir Square and protesters are being shot at, I will not give the same airtime to the soldier or the policeman shooting the protesters as much as I would give to the protesters. It doesn't make sense, because I would give more power to those who have power, who have a gun, who are shooting people who have no guns.
Right.
It doesn't make sense to me. So the same thing in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If Palestinians are being shot at with real guns, with tanks, with all kinds, of course I'm not going to give the same airtime or the same leverage as I would give to the Israeli government. In fact, the Israeli government has airtime on Al Jazeera, and it's criticized a lot for it. But I think it's very important that we stand by those who have less of a voice, who are less privileged, because otherwise we'd be giving those who are privileged more space and more voice, and therefore more power.
Paula, your Change.org is about change, about affecting social change. We were talking before about how you really want to try to call attention to the dangers of climate change and the threat that it poses to all of us. Yet, this is coming at a time when there's been a resurgence of right-wing governments throughout Europe, Latin America, and the United States. We had elections last night in the U.S. in which Republicans increased their hold of the Senate with candidates who are directly opposed to the kind of change you're trying to affect. How do you break through when the movements, the political movements in so many countries is going in the opposite direction?
Yeah. So first of all, change.org is not neutral, but it's an open platform. So we want everyone to be able to start petitions, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or a Green or a Liberal, it doesn't matter. What matters is that every day people's voices are being heard and are part of the dialogue.
Can I stop you there, though?
Yeah.
I would just
But to answer your question,
All right, go ahead.
really answering your question.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, like, change is not for or against climate change.
Right.
Change is giving you the tool to do what you think is right,
Yeah.
whether you're for it or against it. Personally, I'm deeply concerned by polarization because I think it's one of the most distracting things. It keeps us all so busy that we forget to look at what the real problems of this world are. We have about 5 to 15 years to act to fight climate change, and we're so distracted and so busy in trying to divide the world into black and white. And what I fundamentally believe, and that's why I work at Change.org, is that I hope that there will be a generation of young people that will use the tools we provide them for free, whether it's Facebook or Change.org or it's social videos, and they will disrupt all of our structures and remind us that we can be as polarized if we want. If we don't have a world we can breathe in and live in, what's the point?
So, but are you really open to whoever comes to you? Let's say, for instance, that coal miners in West Virginia resisting regulations that are shutting down their coal mines from regulators who want to do something about climate change, want to start a petition on change.org to change their job, to save their jobs, to keep their coal mines operating, to keep coal furnaces burning. Will you promote that petition? Even though it runs counter to the climate change goals you're trying to achieve?
So Change.org, that's again why it's really important to make this point. We're not an advocacy organization. We're an internet platform. We do not have an advocacy plan. We are not for or against climate change. I personally have an opinion, of course, but not the platform. I want these workers to engage on Change.org. I want them to start a petition. I want them to put their political views and their beliefs out there so we can have a pluralistic debate. Yes, that's fundamentally what I believe, that it is better if all sides come to the table and talk to each other and discuss the needs for the future. And obviously these workers do need some income as well. They do need to take care of their families. It's their absolute right to make their voice heard. And I don't think increasing dialogue and increasing, therefore, and strengthening democracy will not bring us to the right solutions. I'm a fundamentalist when it comes to consensus.
Right. So just to carry this further, if allies of Donald Trump wanted to start a petition on change.org to keep out illegal immigrants and ban anybody in that caravan from coming into the United States, would you allow that petition to be promoted on change.org?
So I guess what is important here is to say that change is not neutral, but we're open. We do have red lines. So whenever a petition is around hate speech or bullying or discriminating like marginalized groups, then we will look closely at the content. We also have a user flagging system in place. In general, if you are within the boundaries of our community guidelines, you can start a petition and you can also find supporters on a petition, even on a topic like this. Now, I might personally disagree with that, and it's unlikely that our staff on the ground will help you drive this campaign simply because we do have an editorial guideline, and the editorial guideline of Change.org is it needs to be safe and it needs to be empowering. And I don't think it is an empowering message to say we basically want to build a wall and
you're making an editorial judgment.
But that's my right, because we do have a right, like every other newspaper or news outlet has. Like our teams on the ground have an editorial judgment right.
Right.
But still, this campaign can use the free tools and connect with you, the users on the platform, and I think that's absolutely okay.
Yeah. Dima, let's return to your coverage in the Middle East, because it is, there is so much polarization on every front. An issue that I have spent a lot of time reporting on is the Syrian conflict, where I remember when I was in Doha several years ago, and I saw people raising money for they said Syrian refugees, but in fact, all the signs were it was to help fund people fighting the Assad government. And many of those likely had ties to ISIS and other terrorist groups. How do you at AJ Plus approach an issue like that?
Right. First of all, as I told you, we tell the stories from within, from below, not from above. So we would cover that story maybe from the ground, or maybe, you're talking about a very specific thing.
Yes.
We would cover the story through maybe our contacts in Syria, if, for example, the money, if we do want to do that kind of thing. But that sounds like a story that Al Jazeera would do, not AJ Plus. It sounds like a very big one. Well, it's like investigative kind of journalism where you have to have resources. We don't have those kind of resources. We're a bunch of young people between 20 to 35, who are mostly based, in our headquarters for each language. So in Mexico for AJ Plus Español, in DC and San Francisco for English, in Doha for Arabic, and for AJ Plus Français in Doha and Paris. So we don't have the kind of reporting and kind of capacity that a channel like Al Jazeera has that would be able to send people on the ground and chase a story. We don't do that hard reporting like Al Jazeera does. And the reason for that is that I can't. You know what it takes to send an Egyptian passport holder or a Syrian passport holder or a Lebanese passport holder to another Arab country? You can't get a visa. You can't get a press pass. You can't get authorization to film. You're probably going to get pressured and arrested, and your family, whatever, from your original country. If you go to your original country, it's very difficult for my reporters. So I don't have that kind of aspiration. Whereas in English, AJ Plus English, I do. Why? Because my reporter from San Francisco can just fly to Texas or Minnesota or Palestine or Egypt and report. Why? Because they're American. And they have that kind of facility to move around the world and report on the issues for the English-speaking audience. So it's also a priority that we put for AJ Plus Arabi, for example, that what we care about for the Arab youth today is tolerance, is accepting the other, is living with the other, is avoiding polarization. Because after the Arab revolutions, we discovered that we are not capable of living with each other. We need to work on that. We need to work on you having an opinion, accepting the other opinion without killing them for it. Basically, that's our goal. So the big political stories like that, we really don't do them. But if there is a Qatari story that we can do from within, we do it. For example, Qatari youth are opposed to normalization with Israel. Qatar hosts athletes from Israel every now and then. Qatari youth, they go online, they campaign against it, they put the pressure on the government not to receive the athletes. We will cover that story. We'll interview the Qataris. We'll go look for the athletes to say if they really came, they didn't come, because it's something that we can do. And because it's from the online community, it's from our audience. So it's a micro, again, there are micro stories and macro stories. The story you talked about is very macro.
Although there are micro stories in the stories of those refugees.
We could do it. Yes, and we do stories of refugees, obviously. But the story you mentioned was prior to the birth of AJ Plus. AJ Plus is very recent.
Well,
I know
plenty
exactly
of time to take it from there. Unfortunately, we are out of time here, but a great discussion, and I hope it provides some food for thought for everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael and Paula.